Duck hunters rarely venture out alone, yet it seemed like Mike Williams had broken that cardinal rule one December morning in 2000, heading into the dark waters of Lake Seminole all by himself. His disappearance sparked Florida's most baffling missing persons case, one that would expose a web of betrayal orchestrated by his own wife. Denise Williams played her part masterfully. The grieving widow's tears seemed genuine, her devastation complete. She embodied the image of a devoted spouse suddenly thrust into tragedy. But beneath her carefully crafted facade lay a sinister truth that would take 17 years to surface. This is Monsters. Jerry Michael Williams, who went by Mike, was born on October 16, 1969 in Florida. He and his older brother Nick grew up in Bradfordville, just northeast of Tallahassee. The Williams brothers attended North Florida Christian High School, where Mike was described as an excellent student who was the student body president. It was at that school that Mike met and started dating Denise Merrill. It was also in high school that Mike met Brian Winchester, who would go on to become one of his best friends. Mike and Denise continued dating after high school, where Mike attended Florida State University. After he graduated with a degree in political science and city planning, they got married and began their adult lives together. Mike became a property appraiser for the Ketchum Appraisal Group and was very successful. Denise became a certified public accountant. Their lives weren't all work with no play, though. Mike's friend Brian had also gotten married to his high school sweetheart Kathy Aldridge, and the couples would often go out together and party. Having all grown up in conservative Christian families, the newfound freedom of being adults and living on their own was overwhelming. They would go out drinking and having a good time. That lasted for years, even after both couples had children. Around the same time in 1999, Mike and Denise had a daughter named Ansley, and the Winchesters had a son named Stafford. While all outside appearances made it seem like both couples were building up successful, happy families, under the surface darkness lurked. Mike was making about $180,000 a year, but he was still insecure about money. He would work constantly, sometimes going to the office at night or going directly there after a morning of duck hunting. Most bosses would love the hard work and dedication, but Mike's work habits worried even his boss. He forced Mike to take some time off and spend it with his family at one point. Brian was doing well in the insurance industry, and despite Mike making well above average, he could show some jealousy over Brian's level of income. After Ansley was born, Denise suffered from postpartum depression, which made Mike's excessive work habits a lot more stressful. At some point, Brian had discovered that Kathy was cheating on him, and he began looking for companionship outside of his marriage. It seemed that he didn't have to look far, though.
As I said, she married her high school sweetheart, I married my high school sweetheart, and at first things were really good, I think with all of us, but I was not a great husband, and spent a lot of time away doing hobbies and just stupid stuff, and at one point I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse, and basically I came to realize that she had been cheating on me or was cheating on me with another friend from high school named Gavin, and it crushed me. And after that happened, I began to look outside of my marriage. I guess I had a lot of motivations, but it led me to eventually end up with Denise. We all started going out a lot.
And we stop you right there. We all being who?
My wife and I, Kathy and Denise and Mike, we started going out to bars and concerts and drinking and doing a lot of things that we didn't really do while we were all in college, when probably it's more appropriate to do those sorts of things. But we started going out, a lot of drinking, and I remember one night in particular, there were several nights that we did this, but one night in particular we started talking about sex a lot.
Who's we?
The four of us. And I I was friends with Denise in middle school and high school, but I was never attracted to her until that point. And so after we started talking about sexual things and things that married couples shouldn't be talking about with each other, I think that's when the spark kind of started between the two of us.
On October 13th, 1997, the two couples went to a venue called Floyd's Music Store in Tallahassee to see one-hit wonder Sister Hazel, who you guys might recognize from their song All For You. Brian and Denise went into the club first as Mike and Kathy searched for parking. Inside, before their respective spouses made it into the show, Brian and Denise managed to use the moment to finally have their first kiss. Their affair blossomed in the shadows. They began sneaking around behind Mike and Kathy's backs and turning the heat up on their affair over the following years. It was after the affair had started that both Denise and Kathy got pregnant. Denise was able to use the pregnancy and later her postpartum depression as a reason not to have sex with Mike, but he eventually started to become suspicious. He was very particular about their finances, and he started to notice cash withdrawals being made by Denise. It was the money she was using in her affair with Brian. Mike told her mother that he was concerned that she might be having an affair, or what he really believed, that she was possibly using drugs. Mike's suspicions got Brian and Denise thinking about how they could solve their problem. Denise would not divorce Mike, as she had been raised in a strict Baptist family who believed that divorce went against the Bible. Somehow, that belief can become such a huge threat to people who were raised that way that murder becomes a more reasonable option. The reason for that is because people think they can get away with murder. It's not the act itself of either divorce or murder that they care about. It's what people will think about them carrying out that act. If they get divorced, there's no way to cover it up. All of their friends and family will know. But if they can kill the spouse and cover it up or make it look like an accident, nobody will ever know they committed murder. The decision is not based on if either option is more or less moral. It's based on whether or not they can do it without anyone finding out. In this case, the situation was made worse for Denise by the fact that her parents stopped speaking to her younger sister Deborah for years after she got married without their permission. So she had the possibility of losing her parents, her church, and her child if she divorced Mike. The most reasonable option in her eyes was to murder him. For Brian, he would do whatever it took to be with Denise.
So yes, we eventually started talking about options and ways that we could be together. And Denise, because of the way she was raised, because of her pride, I guess I can't say all the reasons, but she did not want to get divorced, and stated that she would not get divorced, but she still had a desire for us to be together, which narrowed the options even further, I guess. So over the year prior to Mike's death, we discussed several options and alternatives of ways that we could be together.
What was one option?
One of the options, Mike worked a lot at night up at his office, and one of the options was that we could make it look as if there was a burglary of some sort up at his office, and that he got shot in some type of robbery or something up at his office. Denise didn't like that idea. I didn't like that idea, and Denise didn't like that idea, but primarily because there would be an investigation if something like that occurred. So another idea, we all used to go out on boats a lot, and Mike had a boat, and another option was that the four of us would go out on a boat out into the Gulf.
The four of you being whom?
Me and Kathy and Denise and Mike. And we'd go out in a boat on the Gulf, and basically that Kathy and Mike would be pushed overboard, and that Denise and I would find a buoy way offshore that we could hold on to and either let the boat sink or let the boat take off on its own or whatever, and make it look like we had an accident on the water, and that Denise and I had survived the accident.
In the end, Mike would be the only person who would get murdered, but their initial plans included killing Kathy as well. Brian explained that he never had any intention of killing his wife, but he couldn't say that to Denise because that would show he still cared about Kathy on some level, and that would upset Denise.
So another scenario that we came up with was Mike and I going on a hunting trip together, and there being an accident where both he and I ended up in the water, and he drowned and I did not. Denise liked this idea because I don't know how to word it exactly, but she felt better, I guess, about herself, or we could feel better about ourselves if there was a chance that he could make it out of it. You know, I mean, I think there was even talk about, well, it'll be up to God what happens and not us. It won't be a murder. It'll be, an accident. It's kind of screwed up thinking, but that was a scenario that she could live with, I guess. So there was a limited time that we could make that scenario occur because it had to be during the duck season. There's only certain days that you can actually go hunting in duck season. And it had to be at a place where, in my opinion, it would have been successful, which kind of ruled out all of the local lakes around Tallahassee, because the lakes around Tallahassee are mostly shallow. Lake Seminole is a lot deeper.
Let me ask another question. You talked about the life insurance policies and the $500 lapsing. Did that also factor in the equation?
Yes, sir. There were a lot of things that were kind of pressuring us for this to happen when it did. One was Mike had intended for that policy, the $500,000 policy, to lapse. He was not intending to continue it. And so behind his back, Denise paid one more. I can't remember if it was quarterly or semi-annual premium, but we kept it going one more premium period. And we knew we weren't going to be able to keep it going perpetually, that he would eventually see this money, hey, it's going out of the checking account for that policy that I didn't want anymore. So
Mike ended up planning a trip for their 6th anniversary on December 16th, 2000. He told Brian about his frustrations with the lack of sex in his marriage and that he wanted the anniversary trip to be a new start to their relationship. Of course, Brian was his best friend, so he had no reason not to tell him, but that made the cheating couple decide that they needed to do something soon. Over the previous year, while planning the murder, they made sure Mike's death would benefit them financially. Mike already had a couple of policies, but Brian, being his insurance agent, convinced him to take out a new $1 million policy in April of 2000. That policy was supposed to replace a $500,000 policy that Mike already held that he was going to let lapse at the end of the premium period. Brian and Denise paid another quarterly premium without his knowledge, so it would still be in force at the time of his death. Mike also had a $250,000 policy, which would make Denise's total payout $1.75 million. During the summer of 2000, Mike and Brian were duck hunting at Lake Miccosukee, and while walking in the mud, Mike fell into an alligator hole. It was a spot that looked like solid ground, but really had a soft spot underneath that would act as quicksand. Mike was sinking further into the mud, but Brian was able to grab him and pull him out. Later in Brian and Denise's planning, Brian remembered the incident and told Denise that if he hadn't been there, Mike would have likely disappeared, never to be found. They eventually came up with a plan to get Mike out on a hunting trip with Brian, where they could make it look like Mike went hunting alone and drowned after an accident in his boat. Brian talked Mike into meeting him out at Lake Seminole early on the morning of December 10th to do some duck hunting. Mike agreed, but just before midnight on the 9th, Mike called and said that he couldn't go. It turned out that Denise told him she didn't want him to go because she was having cold feet. It would be the only time that Denise showed any amount of apprehension about murdering her husband. After talking to Brian and agreeing that it was now or never, the hunting trip was rescheduled to December 16th. Brian had come up with a reason they had to drive separately and also reminded him to bring his waders. There is a belief among hunters that if you fall into the water with waders on, they will fill up with water and cause you to drown. The truth to that claim seems highly debated and dependent on the type of waders you're wearing, but either way, be careful in the water. Brian had them drive separately so he could leave Mike's Ford Bronco there to make it look like he had gone hunting alone. After meeting at the lake and launching the boat, they motored out to the middle of the lake, and then Brian said he was having trouble with the motor. When Mike stood up to take a look, Brian pushed him into the water and waited for his best friend to sink and drown. Except he didn't. There were a lot of tree stumps that stuck out of the water, and Mike had found one to grab a hold of. Then he started taking his waders off.
I don't remember exactly how I got him to stand up, but I don't know if I pretended something was wrong with the motor or the weight in the boat was off or something, but I basically stopped the boat and got him to stand up, and when he did, I pushed him into the water.
What happened next? So he was in the water, and he was like struggling, and the motor of the boat was still running, and I pulled off just a little bit to get kind of away from him so that he couldn't reach back into the boat. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know if he was trying to swim or I didn't know what was going on, but what I came to find out or eventually realized was he was taking the waders and the jacket off. And he got those off, and I think I forgot to tell you about this part before, but I remember now that area of the lake had a lot of snags, a lot of dead trees that come up out of the water, and there's a lot of stumps that come up out of the water. And he swam over to one of those stumps and held on to it. And he was panicking, and I was panicking, and none of this was like going well. I thought it was going to go. And I didn't know what to do. But he started to yell. And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And so I had my gun in the boat, And so I loaded my gun, and I made 1 or 2 circles around, and I ended up circling closer towards him, and he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him.
Mike was shot in the head with a shotgun, which not only killed him, but made it obvious that he had not died of an accidental drowning. Immediately, Brian changed his plan and used the boat to tow Mike's body back to shore. He ran to his Chevy Suburban and drove it to where he had left Mike's body. Due to his surging adrenaline, he managed to get the body into the back of the SUV and slammed to the tailgate. Then he pushed Mike's boat out into the water and left the scene. He didn't have a lot of time as he was supposed to meet his father-in-law Jimmy Aldridge at a different location to also go hunting, which he had planned out to be his alibi. By the time he arrived at the parking lot where he was supposed to meet Jimmy, he was an hour late and his father-in-law had already left. Brian decided to go home and call Jimmy and claim that he had overslept. When he arrived, Kathy was still asleep, so he climbed back in bed and pretended to wake up and realize he had overslept. Then he called Jimmy, and he had 2 people who could place him at home on the morning of December 16th. After he had established his alibi, Brian went back out to his vehicle to find a place to dispose of Mike's body. When he walked up to his Suburban, he noticed blood dripping out of the back gate and used a hose to wash it off. He headed south towards Carr Lake to utilize one of the alligator holes, but he realized he didn't have any tools.
At that point, Carr Lake was very low. Parts of it were dry, and like the other lakes, there were areas in the lake that had puddles of water or mud. And my thinking was, if I got him there, I could take him out to one of those water holes or mud holes and put him in one of those, and that would be a safe place that he wouldn't be found. But I had nothing to do this with, so I had to go to a store. And I'm 90% sure the store that I ended up at was Walmart. And I bought a shovel, I bought a tarp, and I bought weights, like weights that you lift weights with, because I was thinking that I would use the weights to weigh his body down in the water or a mud hole or whatever. While I was in that store, I actually ran into a friend of ours, Mike Phillips, and I actually totally forgot about running into him or having any conversation with him until I ran into him later during the search for Mike Williams at the lake. And he said, "Yeah, I remember seeing you that day. You were in a panic. You were in a hurry." And he was thinking I was in a hurry to go search for Mike, but I was actually in a hurry because I was trying to bury Mike.
Mike Phillips had gotten the dates wrong when he saw Brian again and thought it was after Mike had been reported missing, but it wasn't. When Brian got out to Carr Lake, he realized the ground was much drier than he expected. Plus, he wasn't able to move the body very far after getting it out of his vehicle. He ended up digging a hole behind some brush and rolled Mike's body up in a tarp, but before he could finish, a truck drove up. Brian went back to his vehicle and made small talk with the man as he lowered his boat down the ramp. The tarp was just barely visible through the brush, but the man didn't seem to notice. When the man got on his boat and left, Brian quickly pushed the tarp-wrapped body into the hole and covered it. He tried to use the hose at his parents' house to wash out the back of the SUV, but he realized he needed a pressure washer. He found a self-serve car wash that wasn't busy and managed to wash the blood out of the vehicle. He was sure that Kathy was calling him to find out where he was, but he had turned his phone off before he had left to meet Mike, and he hadn't turned it back on. He didn't want a digital record of his movements. Once the Suburban was clean, he returned home to shower and then went to a get-together at Kathy's parents' house. He arrived late, but nobody seemed suspicious. At about 12:30 p.m. on December 16th, Denise told her sister that Mike had left early to go hunting, but he still hadn't returned, so she was going to be late for some plans they had. She said she had called him multiple times but got no answer. When he still wasn't back at 2 p.m., she called her father, Warren Merrill, and asked if he would go look for him. Warren grabbed a young man who worked with Mike named Damon Jasper, and he was familiar with where Mike liked to launch his boat. They headed northwest to a town called Sneeds, drove up River Road, and pulled up to a concrete boat ramp on the southwest end of Lake Seminole that Mike would usually use, but his vehicle wasn't there. They drove around for a little bit, checking other spots, and it wasn't long before they found Mike's Bronco at a smaller dirt boat ramp, but the boat was gone. They contacted the local Fish and Wildlife Commission, and an officer came out and helped them look for Mike's boat from various points around the lake. After the sun went down, Fish and Wildlife wanted to launch a full-scale search, but a sudden storm caused them to put a hold on it. The next morning, Warren and Damon returned to Lake Seminole along with a bunch of friends and other family members. Fish and Wildlife worked along with the local sheriff's department to search the lake, but they didn't find anything. It was after midnight the following morning that Brian and his father, Marcus Winchester, ended up finding the boat in a cove of sawgrass. The boat was in working condition with an almost full tank of fuel. There were hunting supplies, ammunition, and a shotgun. Brian was nowhere to be found, and they didn't find any waders in the boat. The search continued at full force for days before it steadily tapered off. The shores of the lake were all searched, and divers did a grid search of the area around the boat. On the 10th day, Mike's hat was found floating in the water, but then months went by with no further discoveries. In June of 2001, a fisherman called the authorities to say he had found a pair of waders floating in the lake. Normally, a body will eventually surface after having been in the water if someone drowns. Gases in the body as it decomposes will cause it to rise to the surface, but that never happened in Mike's case. After the waders were found, it confirmed people's suspicions that he had fallen in the lake and drowned. People began believing that the body must have been eaten by alligators, which is why it was never found. Once that became the popular consensus, on June 29th, Denise's attorney filed a petition for a presumptive death certificate, and they got one the same day. Once Denise had that, she was able to claim his life insurance, which paid out in full. Denise was $1.75 million richer, but it didn't seem like Mike had been murdered specifically for money. Denise didn't seem in a rush to file an insurance claim, and after she got the payout, she tried not to spend the principal amount. She used the interest from the money, which was far less than what Mike was bringing in, so she returned to work to make up the rest. It seemed that the main goal of the murder was so Brian and Denise could be together, but that didn't happen right away either. Of course, they continued seeing each other under the radar, but it took almost a year for Brian and Kathy to separate. Before they could publicly start dating, things hit a snag when Denise started dating another man named Chuck Bunker. When Brian found out, he was furious. He had killed Denise's husband in order to be with her, and now she was going out with another man. He had learned that Denise went out of town with him and was staying in a hotel in Buckhead near Atlanta. He drove there and waited in the lobby until Denise came down, hand in hand with Chuck. He flew off the handle, even threatening to kill himself. Denise eventually separated the men and told Chuck that he should go home without her so she could deal with Brian. Then told Brian that she had broken it off with Chuck and it was all a mistake. Of course, she hadn't broken it off, and both men started competing for her attention. Eventually, Chuck wrote a letter to Kathy explaining that her husband had been having an affair with Denise. Kathy had already moved out and was dating another man, but the letter pushed her to file for divorce. The idea that Brian was seeing Denise was not new to her, but she wanted to marry her boyfriend and she needed to make her separation from Brian official. Despite having murdered Mike to be with Denise, Brian was completely against divorcing Kathy. He spent the following few months telling Kathy that she couldn't get a divorce because it was against the Bible. When she filed the papers, he begged her to change her mind, and during the divorce hearing, he cried uncontrollably the entire time. Once the divorce was final in March of 2003, Brian spent the next 10 months hounding her not to marry her boyfriend. Kathy had to get a restraining order against Brian before she finally remarried in January of 2004. Denise was also not happy about Kathy's divorce or her remarriage, but it wasn't on the same level as Brian. Some people feel that the fact that Kathy, who had also grown up in a strict Baptist family and attended the same Christian school they had, being able to get divorced without any social stigma, made Denise and Brian question their decision to murder Mike. They didn't want Kathy to show how easy divorce could be. Kathy's remarriage was the beginning of Brian and Denise dating publicly. It didn't take long before they were engaged and began working to create a new public image. They both became devout members of their church and reinvented themselves as a good Christian couple instead of murderers and adulterers. They did a 40-day premarital program where they abstained from sex. The couple were married on December 3, 2005, uncomfortably close to the anniversary of Mike's disappearance. They probably believed that they would live happily ever after, having gotten away with murder, but the honeymoon didn't last long. While Brian and Denise were having relationship drama ending in their marriage, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, was lobbying the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to take another look at her son's case. Many people had accepted the shaky explanation for Mike's disappearance, but she wasn't one of them. There were also quite a few people in law enforcement who weren't entirely convinced that Mike had drowned and been eaten by alligators. In 2004, the FDLE agreed to start assisting in the investigation and look for new information in the case. That news caused Denise and Brian to become paranoid. They wouldn't talk at home for fear the place was bugged. If they wanted to talk about the murder, they would either trace the letter C with their finger or hold up their hands like they were holding the bars of a prison cell. Then they would drive out to Miccosukee Greenway to talk. They tried not to talk on the phone unless in coded whispers. They would also pat each other down before talking. Fear twisted their reality. Phantom wiretaps seemed to lurk in every phone, imagined bugs in every room. Brian would later reveal Denise's remarkable talent for self-delusion, saying she, quote, preferred to live in La La Land where she pretended she had nothing to do with it. Together they crafted a fairy tale for her daughter, telling her, quote, she was at home with her baby, Mike went hunting and she has no idea what happened. When authorities started digging into the missing persons case, they began noticing some problems with the story. They learned that Mike never went hunting alone and thought it was strange he would decide to do that on the morning of his wedding anniversary. They wondered why he had used the smaller, muddier, and more secluded boat ramp to launch his boat rather than one of the better concrete ramps he had been known to use before. When the boat was finally located, the engine was off and the tank was almost full, but it was likely that the engine would be on if he fell out of the boat because he had run into something, and it would have continued running until it ran out of gas. Then they talked to some alligator experts about the theory that Mike's body had been eaten. The consensus was that he wouldn't have been. Alligators don't feed in the winter. The temperature is far too cold, so they're in hibernation mode, and all they're doing is maintaining their body temperature. Even playing devil's advocate and pretending that the alligator did get to Mike's body, they couldn't explain how it would have removed his waders, and they pointed out that it would have left something behind. But the waders were removed without so much as a scratch, and Mike's body was gone. Every bit of him. It was as if he did not remain in the lake. The waders were also noted to have been devoid of any residue that would have shown they had been in the lake for 6 months, leading investigators to believe they were planted. When friends of Mike were interviewed, they all said he was very safety conscious. He kept his guns locked up in his office in order to keep them away from his child. A friend who had gone hunting with Mike 1 week before he disappeared said he'd never seen Mike wear his waders while driving his boat. He always waited to put his waders on until right before he planned to get into the water. Despite new suspicions rising in the case, there was still no evidence to point investigators to what had happened to Mike. With the new investigation dying down, Brian and Denise relaxed and began believing they were finally in the clear. Though the investigators were going away, the media was not. Newspaper articles printed stories about Mike every December on the anniversary of his disappearance. Investigation Discovery did an episode of their show Disappeared about Mike, and his mother was able to go on record about her doubts that he had drowned. Brian shifted his focus from law enforcement to social media, where he continued to be paranoid about the rumors and conjecture the general public shared about the case. In 2012, Brian and Denise bought a house but never moved in. Brian became convinced that Denise was planning to leave him, and their relationship spiraled out of control. Well, more out of control. After a fight in November of 2012, Denise told Brian to leave, and in a burst of anger, he grabbed her and pushed her up against the wall. Apparently, he quickly snapped out of it after seeing the fear on her face, so he released her and ran out of the house. He ended up moving into his father's hunting cabin. They had a whole second house at the time, but Denise said he couldn't stay there because she was afraid he would either trash the place or bring sex workers there. The relationship wasn't immediately over, though. Throughout 2013, they went to couples counseling trying to repair their marriage. It wasn't going well, though. By 2014, Brian was becoming overly aggressive with his methods of trying to stay married. He would go to the house while Denise was at work and read her journal. He was able to get into her emails and texts. In 2015, Denise let Brian move into the new house they had purchased, and he saw it as a sign that they were going to get back together, but he would end up disappointed. Brian also grew paranoid once again, this time of Denise. Whenever he brought up Mike, she wouldn't talk to him about it, or worse, she would claim she didn't know what he was talking about. It was possible that she had lived in denial of the murder for so long that she actually believed she had done nothing wrong. Having not been the person who pulled the trigger, it wouldn't have been hard. However, Brian believed her denial of involvement was for an entirely different reason. He believed that Denise was recording him, trying to build up evidence to use in the event they ever got caught. Or worse, she might be trying to catch him on tape and then was going to turn him in herself. Then, to add more fuel to Brian's fire, Denise filed for divorce on August 7, 2015. On top of that, she asked the court to change her name from Denise Winchester back to Denise Williams. Not her maiden name, the name that would reconnect her to the husband he had killed for her. Then she completely shut Brian out. She stopped responding to his communications and wouldn't talk to him. Brian did everything he could to stall the divorce, but it was inevitable. By then, his son Stafford was beginning to worry about him. The 17-year-old had seen bottles of alcohol in the freezer and pills in his bedroom, so one day he took Brian's phone and started looking at pictures on it. He saw pictures of various women in sexual positions, clearly in that house. He also saw text messages where he had been setting up late-night hookups. Stafford didn't say anything to his father, but eventually Brian was told that the teen didn't want to see him anymore. Brian was now all alone with nothing but his paranoia. He was sure that Denise was leaving him to remain as the only person to be punished for Mike's death, and he wanted his own insurance policy. He tried to get her to call him by leaving a note on her car at work, but she didn't. Then he had found $40,000 worth of saving bonds and Denise's name packed among some belongings, and she agreed to pick them up. When Brian arrived, he kept his phone recording in his pocket and told her that someone said, quote, she was talking. He asked to get in the car so they could talk in private, but she refused. Then she said that Mike went hunting in the morning, she was home with Ansley, and she didn't know anything else. After that, Brian believed he was out of options. He would later say he wanted to kill himself, but first he needed to take desperate action in order to talk to Denise. On August 5, 2016, Denise left her house in the morning to head to work. As she pulled out of her neighborhood and onto the main road, she had just called her sister to chat like she did most mornings. That's when Brian climbed out of the cargo area of her SUV into the back seat.
What was the first thing he said to you?
Give me the fucking phone. You're gonna go up to the roundabout. You're gonna go up to the roundabout. You're gonna go around it and turn left, or say it was some kind of direction, but it was definitely about the roundabout. You're gonna go up to the roundabout. You're gonna do whatever. And he's right in my ear, and I was like,
Was he screaming?
yeah, he was screaming. Yeah, he was screaming. And I was just like that. And the roundabout was coming, and he's like, do it. He's like, you're gonna do what I say. Yeah, he's screaming. You're gonna do what I say, and or I'm gonna hurt you. And then I said, what do you mean hurt me, or hurt? I said it back, like hurt me or something. And he goes with this, and then that's when he just like shoved the gun. Oh, but you know what? When he was trying to get the phone, because I had it over here, he grabbed it, but he also grabbed my face, because I remember it hurt. It was like he grabbed the phone, but he also got part of maybe my cheek or something, because he grabbed it that way.
If you're driving, how did you reach across your face? On the side?
It was from behind, because it was like this. It came like this at me, so it was from behind. But yeah, he was screaming, cussing. You're going to do what I say. You're going to turn here. And then when I didn't do what he said the first time, that's when he got the gun and held it right. He shoved it in me, in my ribs, because I could feel it in my ribs.
Okay.
And he just shoved it there. And he said, do it, turn here. And I kept going, I didn't do it. I mean, it's not funny, but I just can't believe it. And because I knew CVS was right there, and it was like, that was my goal with CVS. And so then he just starts screaming the F word in my ear. What are you doing? Do you think I'm not going to, do? He didn't say, do you think I'm not going to use this? But he was just being very threatening. And
was it implied that you thought he would use it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Brian ended the call and had pressed a gun into Denise's ribs. He gave her a direction to turn, but she didn't. He kept trying to get her to drive somewhere, but Denise refused to turn and instead pulled into the parking lot of a nearby CVS drugstore. He told her to get in the back seat with him, but again, she refused. They stayed in the parking lot for an hour as he told her he knew she loved him and begged her to call off the divorce. She would later say that he seemed like he was in a trance, and she told him that she would sit down and talk to him about their relationship if he agreed to go to rehab. He became more lucid and apologized to Denise and had her promise not to go to the police. She promised and told him she was going to go straight to work since she was already late, and told him he could call her at her office in 15 minutes to confirm she was there. She dropped him off near her house where his car was parked, and as he got out of her vehicle, she saw him grab some items from the cargo area and stuff them into a black backpack. They included a sheet of plastic, a bottle of bleach, and what looked to be a shovel or a hammer. Denise did not keep her promise and went to the police to report what had happened. At one point during her interview, she was talking to Detective David McCraney, who was actually her brother-in-law. He was married to her sister, and based on what she had seen Brian put into the backpack, he believed it was clear that Brian was planning to kill her. Part of his reasoning for believing that was because he believed that Brian had killed Mike.
He killed Mike, and he did it for you because he wanted you. And I know that's hard, and I know it hurts, but by God, I'm telling you that's what happened. How old was Ainsley then?
Baby.
Huh?
A baby.
Not even a year. He didn't care. I saw, Deborah and I saw Mike the night before with Ainsley at the mall. And that's the last time I ever saw him. He didn't care about you. He didn't care about Ainsley. He only cares about himself. He made Mike disappear, and he was going to make you disappear today. And you've got to get that in your head. You don't ever have to tell me or anybody else about it. But at some point it needs to come out because he did it. I am telling you. I don't think you had anything to do with it, but he held that over you. And I'm sure at some point he told you something. And I'm not trying to get you in trouble because I don't think you did anything, Denise. But I'm telling you, he killed Mike and he was going to kill you and make you go away. You need to hear that and you need to hear it a lot. You were going to die today. You got lucky. Okay? Next time, it might be he catches Ansley and you, and he kills Ansley in front of you just to hurt you. And if you think he's not capable of that, think about the man who brought something to bury you with, who brought plastic, who brought bleach to cover his tracks. Why doesn't it make sense? He's nuts.
The truth was, the bottle Denise had seen was not bleach, it was water. She had also mistaken a magazine for his gun as something that looked like a shovel or a hammer. It's never been clear exactly what Brian's plan was when he kidnapped Denise, but the plan did not include bleach, a shovel, or a hammer. At the police station, they got Denise's statement on video, then a victim's advocate arrived and talked to her about filing for an order of protection. Another officer came in and asked if they could process her vehicle for evidence, which she agreed to. Then she talked to Detective McCraney. It was clear that he didn't think Denise was involved in Mike's disappearance, which is understandable for a family member. It's likely that nobody in Denise's family suspected her of being involved in whatever had happened to Mike. McCraney suggested that maybe Brian had said something about the murder and she could help put him away for life. Denise defended Brian, saying he wasn't capable of murder, but her brother-in-law told her she was in denial. Despite Brian's paranoia, Denise didn't have any recording of him talking about Mike's murder. If she didn't know anything about it, it's strange that she never told authorities that Brian had brought it up multiple times. It seems that she believed that Brian getting caught would be just as bad for her, so it sounds like she genuinely wanted to convince McCraney that Brian wasn't involved. Her brother-in-law asked her this.
Were you sleeping with Brian the day that Mike disappeared?
No.
It didn't happen until later?
No, yeah.
Well,
Denise lied and acted like there had never been anything going on between her and Brian until after Mike had disappeared. Her brother-in-law wasn't talking to her in any official capacity, though, and eventually FDLE Special Agent Mike Devaney came in and started questioning Denise. Agent Devaney had been working on Mike's case for years, and he also believed that Brian was likely involved. Denise hadn't followed Brian's directions in the vehicle, and the agent wanted to know where she thought Brian was going to take her. He thought it might have been the same place where Mike's body was buried, but he quickly learned that Denise was maintaining that her husband had drowned in Lake Seminole.
Where do you think Mike's buried at?
Oh, I have no idea.
Any speculation on that?
On where he's buried?
Buried.
I mean, I believe...
You don't really believe he died on the lake?
I do.
Why?
I just always have. That's what I believe. And I have, from when he was saying roundabout, I don't know, I talked with the last two people and I can't remember if he wanted me to turn left or right.
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Oh.
Why do you think Mike perished in the lake? Because he didn't die in Lake Seminole, okay?
That's what I've always believed, that's what I believe.
And why?
I've never been proven anything different.
Well, has there been any proof if he would have perished in that lake, he would have been found, okay? There's never been a person that has fallen over or whatever that they've never found except for Mike. I mean, that's literally, it's an impossibility that he died in that lake.
I guess that's just what I believe.
Really?
Yeah.
Well.
The agent tried to rattle Denise's cage by bringing up some videos that were made by Brian of Denise and Kathy performing sexual acts on each other shortly after Mike disappeared. Denise told him she wanted to focus on the paperwork she needed to file in order to get a restraining order. The agent didn't give up, though.
Has Kathy ever talked about Mike's disappearance? Or not Mike's, but Brian's disappearance? The day Mike disappeared?
I don't remember.
You don't remember that?
No. I can text her right now.
No,
I don't remember.
No.
Okay.
I want to hear from you. Okay. Brian Brian just disappeared.
I
Kathy's ever talked about that?
don't, I'd have to talk with her. But again, I really want to focus on this, and if you, I mean,
Well, this is
I
kind of-
understand that this is what you want to talk about.
Well, this thing today, is kind of a done deal. We know what happened. It's going to be verified in the video and all that.
I hope-
Whether Brian admits to what he did to you today, he did it.
Right, I mean,
And once they arrest him, I'm sure they're going to find some of the things that you talked about.
Brian had managed to get a partial alibi for the morning of Mike's disappearance. Supposedly, he was asleep and Kathy could verify that it seemed like he had just woken up, but not long after, he left the house and was unreachable for hours. With no body, they had no exact time of death, and Mike could have been alive for hours after he had actually been killed. That meant investigators were curious about what Brian had been doing while he disappeared for hours on the day of the disappearance. Whatever it was had made him late to the family gathering at Kathy's parents' house. Denise denied having any knowledge of Brian's activities that day and again said she wanted to get the paperwork done. Agent Devaney questioned her lack of interest in finding out what happened to her husband who had up and vanished, but she explained that she was overwhelmed and her priority was getting the protective order to ensure she and her daughter were safe. Not unreasonable, but it still felt suspicious. After the kidnapping, Brian spoke to a friend who was worried about him enough to try and find a bed for him at a psychiatric facility. He wasn't able to get through to anyone immediately, so he left messages and reluctantly parted ways with Brian. Brian went back to his office where he was soon arrested. He knew that he was not in good shape. He saw her interview with Agent Devaney and knew she was scared. She would do whatever she needed to make sure he went down for murder and not her. That's when he told the prosecutor that he had information about the disappearance of Mike Williams and that Denise was involved. Investigators tried to uncover anything that could link Denise to the murder, but they had nothing. In a last-ditch attempt to get the truth, they offered Brian a deal of immunity for Mike's murder, plus no life sentence for the kidnapping if he testified against Denise. On one hand, it seemed like Brian was getting away with murder, but on the other, he was facing a life sentence for armed kidnapping, and if that happened, he had no incentive to tell them what happened to Mike. So Brian took the deal and explained everything that had happened leading up to, during, and after Mike's murder. Then he took them to where he had buried the body. Authorities spent 5 relentless days excavating in 16-hour shifts. Eventually, they were able to recover 98% of Mike's skeletal remains. Nature's preservation proved remarkable. Winter gloves and outdoor booties emerged virtually intact, still clothing Mike's remains. 2 separate DNA analyses removed all doubt about the victim's identity. Brian was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the kidnapping, with 15 years of probation to follow. He was hoping for the minimum, 10 years, but he got much less time than if he was sentenced for first-degree murder. Denise's trial hinged almost entirely on Brian's testimony. His composure crumbled under the weight of confession, tears flowing freely as he recounted the murder. Skeptical jurors found themselves swayed by raw emotion that seemed impossible to fabricate. It didn't help that Denise sat stone-faced through descriptions of her husband's murder, her mask slipping only once as she directed a chilling smile at Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, entering to testify. The rest of the time, she showed absolutely no emotion as she learned, supposedly for the first time, that Mike had not drowned in the lake, but had been shot in the head by her at-the-time lover and buried in a shallow grave. Of course, people show emotion in different ways, but to show no acknowledgement of hearing about your husband's murder is strange. She wasn't surprised by anything she heard. Not about pushing Mike into the lake, shooting him in the head, dragging him to the shore, shoving him in the back of the SUV, or burying him at Carr Lake. It was almost as if she already knew all of those details. Of course, the defense pointed out that there was no evidence that Denise was involved in the murder of Mike, but then why did she continue paying the insurance premium that Mike had replaced? Then the jury learned from Cheryl Williams' testimony that shortly after Mike's disappearance, Denise cut her off from contact with Ansley. Why would she do that? Denise was recorded telling Kathy over the phone that she hadn't said anything to FDLE. Said anything about what? And if she and Brian had never had an affair prior to Mike's disappearance, as she maintained, what was his motivation for murdering his best friend? Those questions, paired with her lack of emotion, is what swayed the jury. In December of 2018, Denise Williams was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. She appealed her conviction in 2020, and 3 judges concluded that planning a death didn't equate to causing it, and the state had failed to prove Denise's active role in the killing itself. They overturned her first-degree murder conviction, but maintained her conspiracy to commit murder conviction as it was clear she had a hand in planning Mike's murder. She still had a 30-year sentence to serve. Florida's Attorney General's office appealed the decision, but the Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. Beyond one family's tragedy, this case carved new channels through Florida's investigative landscape. Cold case protocols evolved, insurance claims scrutiny intensified, and legal precedents reshaped prosecution strategies. Journalism demonstrated its power as society's watchdog, while determined investigators proved that patience and persistence can unlock the most sophisticated criminal puzzles. Most crucially, the Williams case revealed that beneath polished veneers of respectability, behind masks of grieving innocence, violence cannot hide forever. Committing evil will likely poison your soul and lead you down a path that will uncover your true identity as a monster. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.